in progress. So, namaste, guys. So, just running up from the cafe downstairs where I was doing some writing. I It's interesting because as the week goes, I'm thinking about these classes. I'm like, well, what the heck am I going to say for Jupiter that hasn't already been said or isn't very obvious? And so anyway, so then I write something, and then not yesterday, it was the day before. I'm in Puebla, Mexico now, right next to Mexico City. And I have a friend here, and so he brought me around yesterday, and he told me, "Oh, we can see this place, we can stop place, we can see all these different places." And he mentioned a tree, and he mentioned a pyramid. And so I said, "Well, the tree and the pyramid are the two things I really want to see." So he took me to this pyramid, and it had a cathedral on top. Now, Jupiter is expansion. He's religion. He's dogma. He's the guru. He's the beliefs. He's theory. All of these kind of things. A little bit disconnected from reality. Jupiter is actually, which is a little bit odd because we think he's the great wise one. So my friend took me to this Catholic church, and it's on top of a pyramid. And apparently, it's the biggest pyramid in the world. And it was really kind of interesting. And so we go in and we sit down in the chapel area, and I'm looking at this thing at well, it's a goddess, it's a Devi they have up there on the altar. It's the goddess, and they got the beautiful dress, and she's standing on this silver crescent moon. And I'm looking underneath that, there's this blue ball. And I'm looking at that, and I'm going, is that a snake wrapped around the blue ball? And is this a Catholic church I'm in? What the heck is going on? And so then we went through the Catholic Church, and I could see that a good picture of the idol that they had on the altar, and I could see the snake very clearly. But as we're going through this, it's full of these Devi goddesses, these feminine goddesses, and they're all standing on the crescent moons, and they don't all have the snake there. But for me, I had a bit of Christianity. I grew up in Canada, so I had like a little bit of Catholic school when I was young, or this kind of thing. But I actually don't know much about Christianity. And so to see all these goddesses and the snake symbol and all of these sorts of things being sort of celebrated in the Catholic Church, and it being on top of a pyramid and all these sort of strange things, it really, in a sense, for me, it was like this expansion of consciousness, which is what Jupiter is. Jupiter's expansion. We generally think of it as an expansion of humanism. Jupiter humanizes us and humanizes the others in this world. And well, I guess it's like a church. Anyone who goes to the church and sort of asks for asylum in a sincere way, that church has to open their door and kind of give them asylum. And so that's that energy of Jupiter. It's kind of all embracing, it's all accepting, very inclusive, very permissive as well. These days, we might consider Jupiter a very liberal energy, because he's so inclusive, I guess. He just wants to draw everyone in, which doesn't, we sometimes don't think of him that way because we often think of religions and spiritualities and these things as being these sort of old orthodox things, but that's usually some influence from Saturn on Jupiter who kind of make religion and beliefs inflexible. But generally, Jupiter, a strong Jupiter energy, you could say, is quite flexible, and it can kind of bring anyone in under its umbrella. And so the other thing I was thinking about in this class, like I've talked a little bit about tantra, and I didn't write much about it. And tantra is interesting because there's different ways they translate the word tantra. And so used to hear they translated it as kind of a weave. And now some scholars say that's not a correct translation, actually. But I think it still works, right? Because you're kind of, we do think of it as this weave of kind of time and space, and there's a point where those two strings kind of they meet, and that's the moment. And when you put all those moments together, you get this whole tapestry, this woven, beautiful piece of art that's our lives, or whatever it might be, our home or anything. So the other way that they sort of translate the word tantra now is this idea of expansion, expansion and liberation, kind of the two root words for it. And so in a way, it's this expansion of consciousness. And that's, well, of course, we're working with Jupiter, and so I spent a lot of time with the scriptures this week, kind of reading. I've got Spandakarikas that I travel with, and some other little notebooks and stuff of scripture, and these are Bhairava scriptures. A lot of Kashmiri Shaivism is basically the Bhairava scriptures. And Bhairava is this kind of force of consciousness. When you read the practices, I can pull it up here. But when you read the practices of the Bhairava Tantra, what you're doing basically is you're expanding your consciousness to include the whole external world. And then you kind of draw that whole external world into yourself. And they talk about this Bhairava, it's almost like this wheel of fire, like a wheel of energy, but they talk about it really as this fire. And so then you take in the whole objective world and you burn it in this fire of Bhairava consciousnness. You burn it inside of yourself in a way. And by doing that, then you become one with it all. In a sense, because you realize that actually what's happening, our experience of this world is we're drawing in all of these sense objects from everywhere. And well, where do they come from and where do they go? Well, they actually come from our own consciousness. It's able to connect with them because there's an impression there of it already. And then we draw it in and it kind of gets dissolved inside of us as well. And so that sort of expansion of Jupiter, that expansion of consciousness, it's like my Mexican friend here, he's got one of his sons was born in Canada. And so he's asking me about this, if I thought this was a good thing. And it's like anything that can sort of allows us to reach out and see, like when we talk about humans, for example, that humanization of Jupiter, it's like, oh, well, they're just like me. Oh, look at those Indian people. Actually, they're just like me. And I travel, and so travel is actually really, really good for that sort of humanizing experience. But you get village people, they've never gone out, and so they look like a village person in Canada looks at India and goes, oh my God, those people are so different. They're nothing like me. And so what we want to do with our own spiritual practices, and Jupiter is kind of spirituality, is expand that to say, oh, just like me, oh, they're the same as me. That's no different than me. And the more we can draw things in like that into ourselves, that it's the same as I am, the kind of I don't know what can you say, the more power you're going to feel from one perspective, from that tantric perspective, but that's that Jupiter humanism. And so there's faith, there's hope, there's optimism, there's that. In astrology, Jupiter is considered the great benefic. And so the more we can kind of humanize ourselves, the more benefit is going to come. It's like Jupiter is also sort of associated with the color yellow. We think of the yellow lamp. I think of the old stories of philosophers in Athens, like Diogenes going around with a lamp, just looking for that sort of honest man. But it's that yellow glow. And that's sort of like someone who's quite humanistic, right? And they sort of very inclusive with everyone. They do have this glow, and Jupiter is said to have the most gravity. And so what happens is they just naturally sort of draw people towards them. Right? It's like the guru, they start talking and a crowd gathers and people come and they go, oh, wow, this is a wise person. And that's because that sort of, they instill that sense of faith, hope, and optimism in a sense. And they're not like a truly good ideology is very inclusive of everyone. Now, on the negative side of Jupiter is Jupiter, well, I mentioned the word gravity. And so that's one thing. We think of the word gravity, okay, things draw towards them, but there's certain situations we could say, oh, it was a very grave situation. Very almost hard to find synonyms for this word grave, but it's like it's a very serious sort of situation. And so Jupiter can bring us into that kind of a thing. And then the other way of Jupiter is through over expansion. And so, well, you could say in a home or a land, like I'm in this little apartment now, and it's fine for one person. I could bring another one in, I could bring another one in, and oh, I don't know, by about 4 people, we'd probably start getting a little bit uncomfortable. By 10 or 20 people, it would be that sort of problems due to over expansion, too much hope, too hopeful, too sort of idealistic. And we see that with a lot of dogmas and a lot of ideologies actually, is that they try to be too broad and they try to draw everyone in when actually you can't do that. And that's of course the big mistake a lot of politicians make. Trying to make a platform that's kind of good for everyone. And that's also the sort of goal, like we see in politics. These days, it's very divisive, right? The two sides are going more and more apart. And you don't have anyone in the middle that's kind of holding an umbrella. It's a good symbol for Jupiter, the umbrella, because it goes up and it spreads out on both sides, kind of that inclusive. We think of the expansive energy, again, the umbrella. Jupiter has a lot to do. They associate him with prana, but he also associated with the element of ether. He gets associated with speech, like Saraswati is also associated with Jupiter and mantra and these kind of things. And so we think of speech, the way it comes out of our mouth, that sound wave, and it expands fairly evenly in all directions unless it hits some obstacle. And so that's that energy of Jupiter. You throw a pebble in the water and the ripple effects just expand outward in every direction. And so that's that Jupiter sort of energy. And really that's like, I think a lot of us are sort of teachers. We're Jupiter figures ourselves. And so people come to us because we're going to instill some kind of hope and optimism in them. They feel like, well, in a sense, Jupiter would be the warmth that's in prana. And so Jupiter figures kind of radiate this warmth. In a way, they're kind of kapha. They're like a nice Jupiter is a little bit like cozy and squishy and warm. And so in that way, we could say like Vata people that are very windy and they don't have a lot of direction and they're not kind of very grounded. They're usually the most drawn towards the Kapha people because they're warm. They can give them some hope, right? They don't cold and scared and frightened. So the Jupiters are kind of warm. They can give that hope. They're also like Jupiter is kind of like Venus says yes. Saturn says no. Jupiter kind of also says yes. He gives permission. That's what they say classically. Jupiter ruled over the husband figure in the relationship, and so they say from a classic perspective, the husband or the father of the house is the one who gives permission, sort of thing. And so there always has to be a balance in that as well. You can't be too. It's another where Jupiter causes problems, especially when we go through, say, a Jupiter Rahu period in our lives. We're very permissive, like, but it's even with ourselves, sometimes you look at yourself, there's something you want to do, and you kind of look inside and you go, can I do that? Is that right or is that wrong? And Jupiter kind of discriminates. So he chooses between right and wrong. And so like, can I do that? And it's that inner Jupiter that says yes or no. Yeah, go ahead, you can do that. Or the inner Jupiter kind of says, no, that's not the right thing to do. Don't do that. And hopefully we have a good Jupiter and we can listen to it. And so we do the right thing. And so that's all these sort of Jupiterian energies like that. I wanted to go back to this Catholic church that I saw again, because for me it was well, it was almost like my mind exploded when I met this church and this I don't know, you could say this Durga in a in a Catholic church in a way, this Devi goddess. I had no idea that this kind of thing the Catholics had this. I know Catholics are quite superstitious, so. But the other thing that's been happening lately, I had a man, he came and he started telling me ghost stories, telling me stories about being possessed and these different entities living in these places, and some of them following him and trying to sort of track him down, and a lot of that sort of stuff. And this guy didn't seem schizophrenic. And so you listen to these sort of stories, and I hear a lot, like people, I don't know, I'm one of these people they feel comfortable talking about ghosts, I guess. Maybe it's my own Jupiter, right? My expansion, and people are like, oh, I can talk about this strange stuff with this guy. And so I hear a lot of these stories, and I've always sort of taken them seriously. I take this view of, say, mental health, for example. The Quakers used to do this back in about the 16th century. But when we look at schizophrenics and people like this, we think, oh, they're crazy people, forget anything they say. But it's like, actually, they're having an experience of different realms. And it's like, well, a time or a certain place has an energy, for example. And that energy, well, everything, like even in a field, every blade of grass sort of has its own astrology chart, its own fate and its own destiny. And you step on a blade of grass and it kind of falls over. And that was part of its destiny, to meet that. And that whole, and so we see kind of how these places have their own energies. And well, what is a ghost but a sort of moving energy that we can't sort of see, but we can feel its effect. And so we get that in a place like if you go to the forest meadow, all of those blades of grasses and trees and everything, that it makes almost like this great symphony of energy. And you go and sit in that field and you feel that whole symphony of energy that's going on there. Of course, nature usually feels quite nice. But if you go like downtown, in the ghetto part and the bad part of downtown, again, it has its own sort of symphony of energy, and there's an effect. And you can see the effect it has in both places. And so I think about these energies, and energy's not static. It's being moved by time. And so time is they kind of energize each other that way. And so they're kind of changing and shifting. But these energies are they're no different than what people call ghosts in a lot of ways. My Mexican friend told me that, like, I went in and I visited his family for just, you can say 20 minutes, then we kind of left again. And then he told me yesterday, I saw him again, he said, yeah, my wife and my daughter and my son, they all had ghostly experiences in the house after I was there. And so he's like, did you bring some ghosts from India? And so what the Jupiter does, he doesn't go, oh, you crazy people talking about ghosts. We expand our mind a little bit and go like, okay, what are they talking about ghosts? And in a way, it's like, well, we all do have a kind of a whole bunch of, we carry all these energies with us wherever we go. And so some people are going to experience those as ghosts, right? They're going to feel things that they maybe didn't feel, that seem unnatural to them. You know, it's sort of like if you go into a haunted house, everybody says, oh, it's a haunted house, don't go there. And you go into that place and you feel something unnatural. And so the Jupiter energy doesn't want to say, oh, that's just poppycock, that's foolish nonsense. We want to really try to draw everything into our reality in a sense. And so it's like some people say, like, oh, I don't believe in anything that I can't see. And it's like, well, you believe in the wind, don't you? You can't see the wind, you just see the effect that the wind has. And they're like, well, yeah, of course, but that's different. It's like, well, how is that different? Um, it's like ghosts and energy. We see the effect it has. We feel the effect it has. Again, go sit in a forest meadow and go sit in the bad part of downtown. There's a huge difference in the effect you're going to feel from those energies. And so, like that, just give me one moment just to pull up this Jupiter document here. Oh, it's there. And I am screen sharing. Oh, I think you can see it now. There it is. There it is. Yeah, I think you can see it now. And so we get these things with Jupiter again. Some of the negative effects is that overexpansion. Part of that is pride. Like there's a lot of like confidence and self-esteem is sort of a big part of the Jupiter energy. There's a few energies, Jupiter and Venus in particular, say in the astrology chart, it almost doesn't matter if they're good or bad planets, doing good or bad in your life, Jupiter and Venus. We usually experience them in a positive way. And so Jupiter, we feel very good about ourselves. And so, oh, everything's nice, everything's good. But once the pride starts to sort of get overinflated, we feel that as a good thing. We're like, oh, I'm so proud. But that overinflation is actually it's a bad negative in life, that excessive pride, that sort of, they call it hubris, that sort of, they've expanded beyond themselves. Their pride and their confidence, it's like, okay, maybe they're good at these sorts of things. And so you have a right to be proud. Pride isn't a bad thing. But if you take your little bit of knowledge of that thing and try to say, oh, I know everything, well, that's too much, sort of thing. And that's a big danger with guru figures in a sense. And one of the things you could say my teacher also warned me about, and any sort of guru figure has to really watch, is their pride, because they get so many people, they come and they say, oh wow, guru, you're so smart, you're so wise, oh wow, you're the best, oh wow, look at your life, it's the greatest. It's, so you get a lot of compliments. You get, oh, thank you, you've changed my life, oh, it's amazing, you're a miracle worker, and so you get a lot of these things. So it's very easy for the pride just to sort of grow and grow and grow and grow. And we see this in many guru figures. They're just like, their pride is too big. India is notorious for this. The Indian pundits and the Indian Brahmins are notorious for this excessive pride. And it's probably, again, like, Jupiter's a great benefic, and it's kind of hard to sort of say too much against Jupiter. But certainly that pride is probably one of the biggest areas, the biggest criticisms on Jupiter. Now, I've noticed this in my own life. Again, people come and they say all kinds of amazing things for me. And there's been certain times when, like, Saturn's kind of the remedy for that excessive pride. You have to learn some humility. And so I remember one year I was traveling across Canada. I was talking at ashrams, I was talking yoga studios, homes, and all this kind of thing. And everybody's going, wow, you must be a enlightened person, and blah, blah, blah. And so I go in the ashram, I give the talk, everybody be like, wow, amazing. But as soon as I walked out of the ashram, I'd be hitchhiking on the side of the road, or I'd be just kind of like wandering through. Maybe I got a ride and then I have to walk through town and get to the other side or something like this. And so I was going from this like, wow, you must be an enlightened person. Everybody's looking at me. To everybody's now looking at me like, oh, you're a bum. You're like a speck of dust on the side of the road kind of thing. And so I found this was a very, very sort of good practice. And it's something I think any guru or teacher figure really has to find certain ways to humble themselves. My Mexican friend was asking me because there was a couple of years and I broke a whole bunch of bones and I took some dishwashing job. And I know this Mexican guy from when I was doing construction work and I was the big boss. And he was like, wow, I couldn't believe that when you took that dishwashing job. He said, how do you do that? You go from being the big boss to this just crappy, worst job you can get. Um, and it was good. You could say the dishwashing job was probably, in a sense, I learned more. I got more from that job than I did from being the big boss man, in a sense. And so that sense of humility, we really have to figure out how to work that into our lives. And one good way is to, and this is what the pride often blocks us from doing, but another good way is to try new things. Because of course, anytime you try something new, you start off like a child again. You don't know anything. You're looking at this thing and you feel stupid, dumb, like, wow, how do I not know this? And so you try to work through that. And that's a very good way of sort of counteracting that Jupiter pride. Um, get out of your comfort zone a little bit, and these sorts of different things. Very, very good way to sort of keep that balance. And well, that's going to that sense of humility, you could say, because the pride sort of detaches us from the people on the lower end, in a sense. You become like, well, the guru figures that he deserves, say, I don't know, he deserves the nicer room than the masses. He deserves to get better treatment from people on the street than just the dishwasher, for example. And oftentimes the guru figure will like, do you know who I am? You know, this kind of thing. And really like, well, why does the universe care who you are? And so a little bit of humility, it takes them down. And the masses are kind of the Saturn energy. We're going to talk about that in a couple classes, of course. But that's the masses of people. That's like Saturn probably accounts for 80% of the population, the laborers and the servants and the kind of sort of lower uneducated castes. And so Jupiter kind of shoots himself in the foot, you can say, when he separates himself from those masses too much. We see sometimes like a Pope figure, for example, is a Jupiter figure, and everybody's kind of looking up. Nobody knows the Pope for who he is. He has become like an object, you could say. And Jupiter, the real energy of it is that compassion, that light that sort of allows you to see and discriminate. And so in a sense, there's some of that vulnerability there as well, that sense of openness. And all of those things come through the Jupiter energy. And so the more strong and secure you feel inside, the more open you are. And people really like the guru figures who are very open. The door of the church is just open to the public, not a little private little thing. It's like, well, what's going on there? These kind of things. And so Jupiter is that openness. And we need that openness to connect to the world, to feel the energies of the world, for me to see and understand these people talking about ghosts, or remember a guy talking about lights and aliens kind of coming down, and they would talk to him and tell him things, and like I told you about him, and then I got to know him and hear his story about it all, and I thought, wow, Guruji, how do you know all of this? Oh, the lights came and told me. I'm like, wow, man, that's incredible, right? Um, but you see that there's some wisdom in there, even if sometimes they don't see it. But you have to use that Jupiter because I talk about energy from the Indian perspective. He was talking about energy from this perspective of lights and aliens. Um, kind of, yeah, different alien races sort of living up there. You hear some Westerners are into that. That's how they talk about it. And so a lot of times they're talking about the same things, but using a different language. And so we have to be open to see that, to recognize that. It's like my guru for Kashmiri Shaivism, Mark Dichkowski. I remember one year the whole year he was reading from Sufi texts, actually. And it's kind of like, well, what does Sufism, Islam have to do with this Hindu tantra? Well, they're the same thing. That's what it has to do with it. They're just using a different language. And so really, I find, especially on the mystical side of things, we really, really have to be open to those possibilities. That they're just talking a language we don't understand for energy work or whatever it is. Uh, I meet a lot, like Christmas time, I was with my mother and we went over to some of her friends' houses for Christmas dinner and that kind of thing. So I was hanging out with all these, 70, 80. I think the one lady was in her 90s. Oh, hanging out with all these old ladies from middle part of Canada. And mostly they were Christians, rage Christian, and sort of cowboy women. But when they talked about energy, they were talking about angels and these sorts of things. And again, it's like, how is their angels any different than my Ganesha? It's the same thing with a different language, and so we really have to be open to that with our guru energy. Or go ahead, Emmett.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that you had mentioned, I think it's to remember that there is some sort of discernment that needs to happen on Jupiter's side to make sure he doesn't let anything just come in. Like, not every language will be comprehensive for the progress that Jupiter needs, maybe. As that, I think that's an
Well,
important.
well, this is also very important. It's like the alien guy, Mark, Martian Mark, let's just call him. So Martian Mark, at first, this guy's just talking crazy, like the doors are kind of closed and not letting him in. But I kind of opened a little bit and listened to him. And then, used my own discernment uh, like that. And so my discernment sort of told me that he was a guru genius, actually, and not the crazy man that everybody else sort of saw him as. So maybe that makes me a crazy man too. I'm not sure sometimes. Um, and so these kinds of things. Now, I put in this other section here. I think I can make this bigger. You can kind of see it. Because I kind of just started writing about how each of the planets and each of the energies, they have a different way of protecting themselves. And so you talked about borders. And Jupiter is kind of himself, he's a spot on the body. The Chinese would call him like the defensive chi. And so this is a little layer of fat we have under our skin that keeps illnesses from coming into us. But then it's like the wisdom we have is sort of this fat we have on the body. Again, even the fat under our skin, it seems useless. It doesn't seem like in the West now, we don't like that at all. We're like, oh, fat, do anything to get rid of that. But it's very protective, and so is our wisdom. It's like I remember when I was in university, like, you're studying philosophy? That's useless. What the heck are you studying philosophy for? Right? It's like, well, they're partially right. It's like, well, what the heck are you going to use philosophy for? But in another sense, it's like when I've run into bad times or I've had hard times in life, I'm able to kind of tap into my philosophy, tap into my beliefs of this world. And that's almost like this healing balm that I get. And it's like the fat on your body. You usually don't even notice that it's defending you. And that's that sense of discrimination. If you got some good, and Jupiter's a discrimination between what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad. And he's the judge making a judgment. And some of these things get quite distorted in modern spirituality. They're like, oh, well, you shouldn't judge. Don't judge people. Well, don't judge them on their face. Get to know them a little bit. But once you gather this knowledge or some information about them, then by all means make your judgments. And it's like, well, if you've ran into 10 people that look like a dirt bag, and those 10 have been a dirt bag, and the 11th one comes along, well, you don't have to get to know that 11th person. You can say, oh, actually, they're a dirt bag just like them. And it might not necessarily be true. But sometimes you kind of over defend ourselves as well. And that can at times be a good thing. Kind of protects us from a lot of ways. And in other ways, sometimes the loss isn't so great. It's like, oh, well, I didn't talk to them because it's like Mark with Martian Mark. Like, I could have easily not talked to him because he's a crazy man. And there wouldn't be any loss in my life. I just wouldn't have this nice little story to tell. Would be the only real big loss. And so it wouldn't have mattered too much. But Jupiter he's connected to our Dharma. Our Dharma is like our Tao, our path, our spiritual path in life. And so what this is like our beliefs. And so you have certain beliefs. You can see it quite clearly in an astrology chart, but you have certain beliefs, and then the actions that come from those beliefs shows you the value of your belief. So your karma, the things you have to kind of do, it shows you what the value of your beliefs is. And so if you have these kind of improper beliefs, I guess you could say, you don't really understand the difference between right and wrong, then, well, we all kind of know you're going to have a hard karma. The things you're going to have to, experiences you're going to actually have to do in life are going to be quite difficult. And those are stemming from your dharma because you're getting your direction through your beliefs. And if they're wrong, well, then you run into walls and obstacles and all of that. You don't have a good light shining to show you where to go. Which is also very, like, they call Jupiter as like the inside of ourselves. It's our moral compass. Shows us which way to go. And so that will determine your karma, the kind of activities you have to perform in life. So it's quite like that. And so we get these, I've got this chart here. You can see so many different ways. Every planet's defending us in a little bit different way, or trying to persuade us or persuade others in different ways. Now, I'm sure some of you have probably looked into this. If you have anything to add on these, please do add it. I just kind of did this in a fairly quick brainstorm. And so I'm sure there's parts missing and stuff like that. But we see something like the sun. It's just this power, this authority. And so we talked a little bit about last class about different ways of persuasion. And so the sun is just sort of, sun isn't going to kind of argue with anyone. He's just going to tell you that's the way it is. And one of the ways, actually, people sometimes ask, how do I know the difference between whether my intuition is talking to me or if my mind is just blah, blah, blahing to me? And so we want to follow our intuition, essentially. And so a lot of times we have a decision to make, and the mind is kind of going between these different things. And it's on this side, you've got all these reasons. And your reasonable mind has really broken things apart, and you're going, oh, I should do that because of that, and I should do it because of that, and it should be because of that. But sometimes inside of you, there's something else. The other side is just going like, not even listening to your little reasons or argument. And it keeps coming up and it's going, do this. And you look at that and you go, well, why should I do that? And inside it just sort of says, just do it. And then you go, well, there's all these reasons over here I should do this. And so we kind of have faith in ourselves, and that's the big part of Jupiter, is to have that faith in the self. And Jupiter moon go, or sorry, Jupiter sun go very well together for this. When you have that sort of inner faith, then you can say, okay, well, this part of me is not giving a reason, but it's certain. It just knows. And that's that sort of sun energy. It's that just knowing. And so sometimes when we're looking for what the intuitive side inside of ourselves, it's that side that just knows. It's not arguing, it's not giving reasons, it's just saying, do this. It's just silent, actually. And so that's kind of the sun. How it protects us and persuades us. Now, it's a little bit, I had a little tough time with the way the sun loves us, right? Because on one hand, it's that fatherly love of the sun, and so it wants to perfect us. It wants us to be the best we can possibly be. And so the sun is a little bit cruel that way, because it's like, well, you could be better. You're not very good, it kind of tells us. And so we're like, oh, whoa, that dude, chill out. But it's that voice that wants us to become better. On the other hand, I put here that the sun also relates with kind of romantic love and this kind of thing, because it's that sort of certainty again. You know, when you meet someone, especially when you just meet, that first 3 months, you could say, and you're just so sure that's the right person, and the whole other world sort of dissolves and disappears. That's a lot of that sort of Leo energies of romance and this kind of thing. So that's also a kind of love connected with the sun. That racing of the heart, that's the sun, that risk a little bit. And so the moon then is this, well, the moon is really the main planet that protects us. He's the draws boundaries, and that's how the moon protects us. Now, the moon represents longing. And so in a way, it's that, or even craving in a sense, also relates to moon. And so the moon kind of makes you want it, that moon energy. It's not active. It's not going out and saying like, hey, come to, or yeah, no, hey, come here. It's just sort of sitting there, and it sort of draws towards it, you could say. It's like, it's like, how could you say? It's like going home. You know, you're out in the world and things are a bit tough. And so actually you want to go home because it's a comforting place. You know, you can kind of relax, you can let go. And so the moon kind of makes you want it, sort of thing. So a lot of our desires, of course, are attached to moon. And again, that emotional appeal for persuasion is very, very strong. The moon is kind of interesting because, like we were talking about, I call like things like privilege. I should probably make another section here for privilege, because each planet kind of has its own privilege. And so, of course, like the sun, the king, well, he gets all the privileges. He just does what he wants. And the moon is like this, it's like a pregnant woman, you could say, going out in the public. And everybody kind of like, oh, you can go in front of me. Well, if you're in a, say, a smaller town or a village, big cities, nobody cares about anybody. But you go in these kind of communal areas, and the pregnant women, it's going to be like, oh, you can go first in line, and oh, do you want to sit down? You want a seat? And so the moon actually gets a lot of the kind of, say, privileges of queen, but those privileges that the mothers get. And generally in society, we always sort of say, like, we have to take care of the mothers, like, be nice to your mama, don't talk bad to your mama. You know, kids get beat when they swear at their mama sometimes, you know, in some families. And so we really do a lot to protect mama. And so, and mama, of course, is like mama bear in her defense, like she is the defense. And so don't cross mama. And so that kind of thing. For love, obviously, unconditional sort of motherly love, sort of thing. Mamas will feed anyone. It's one of the reasons a cow, they say the cow is holy in India, because you'll see sometimes the cow is lying there and there's a monkey drinking milk and there's a puppy drinking some milk from the tit, and the cow will just feed everyone. He doesn't just that sort of unconditional nourishment. He's got milk in its udder and you come and give it a pull, it's like, yeah, have some milk, man. And so that also. And I guess you could say in another way, we're drawn to moon, we're drawn to mama energy because we know it will nourish us. And we know we need that nourishment. We need that sort of comfort, that opportunity to let go and be cared for. On the other hand, that inner moon energy is us being the caregivers. Mars, anger. Of course, anger is a defense mechanism, right? We feel a little bit comfortable. Someone pushes a sore spot on us and we roar up in anger. And so that's sort of the main way. Mars is very proactive. I've got defense and protection there. But Mars is very proactive in its defense and its protection, going out and sort of like going outside the walls, you can say, and sort of keeping the hedges trimmed and keeping things sort of safe outside and around. Persuasion wise, of course, Mars is going to use force to persuade, but Mars also rules Scorpio. And so it's going to use some psychological manipulation. And Mars is really more than any other planet, I think. Well, Sun has already won. So Sun's not worried about winning. So he's already won. But other than that, no other planet wants to win as badly as the Sun. Right? He's playing to win every time. And Mars also has a way of loving us. It's like our brotherly love. Our brothers sort of challenge us a little bit. And that's how they show us love. You know, it's like, well, I don't have my brother, me and my brother don't have a great relationship, but on another sense, I'm the person I am today because I had to fight so hard against an older brother. Against those like David and Goliath, you could say almost. And so, anyways, I don't care what obstacles in my way, I'll overcome it. And in a way, it's like, well, that's kind of how a brother is supposed to show their love by challenging you and helping you to rise and helping you to grow and be better that way. And so that's sort of that brotherly love. They come and kind of give you a little slap in the back of the head, you know, just showing you I love you, brother. We get Mercury. Mercury, of course, is the one protecting himself through humor, feeling uncomfortable, and they kind of laugh. These sorts of things. And that's that Mercury defense mechanism. And you'll see it like Mercury Sun or strong Mercury people will often sort of defend themselves that way. You could also say that Mercury sort of gathers all the facts as well to sort of defend himself. And for protection, he wants to know everything. He wants to have a whole bunch of information to analyze. And that's so he can feel comfortable and he can feel safe and so he can protect you. Basically, all these planets are trying to protect you in their own way. And so that's kind of how Mercury is. This is where Mercury in Pisces is considered debilitated, but yet you see all these really kind of smart people with Mercury in Pisces. And it's because they've sort of gathered too many facts. They've gathered too much information. And they're just kind of drowning in information. And it's not protecting them anymore. It's too much. It's to sort of sift through and that kind of thing. So, and of course, when it comes to persuasion, Mercury's the great planet of rhetoric, of argumentation. And so he wants to convince you of the truth, of the, well, we talked a lot about that last time. And then the sort of love Mercury has is more the friendship, the platonic love, the companionship. And that's how Mercury shows love. Just by being your friend, by being your buddy, giving you someone to talk to. Travelers, we talked about that sense of Mercury being connected with a lot of travel as well and zipping around. And that's what travelers are doing. We have these very short sort of friendships with people. and it's just kind of someone to talk to for a week, and then we go our separate ways. Someone to, all right, best friend on the bus, man. I just met my best friend in the whole world for 3 days in San Cristobal. Wow, we were bosom buddies. And now I left. I don't know if I'll ever see or talk to this guy again, right? It's just kind of a very, well, Mercury's very easy that way with his friendships. They can come and go and simple, no strings attached in a way with Mercury. So where difficulties come in, people have Mercury attached to their seventh house in their relationships as they get into these kind of, well, I short form it as immature relationships. They don't want to make that commitment. They don't want those strings. And so they tend to have a few more relationships when Mercury's involved because they don't take it seriously. On the other hand, they get into these, they can have these very nice platonic relationships, right? Yeah, very, there's no sex, there's no romance, but they're very, very close and friendly. So there's that. That's also when we're talking or advising people on their relationships, for example, and a big problem with the relationships these days, well, we have so much influence from outside, from movies, from even religion, and how relationships should be. And when our relationships aren't that way, we boo, oh, I don't have a good relationship. Oh my, I don't have what that person has. I don't have what that movie told me should be. I don't have what my church tells me I should have. Whatever it is, boo hoo hoo. We have to kind of help them to see what they do have. And so if they have these really great platonic relationships and these really great friends circles, it's like kind of, in my life, I've had, since I started teaching, I don't know, more than, when I decided to take teaching seriously, you could say more than 10 years ago, I've had almost no relationships on the romantic side. But it's like I have so much intimacy with people, and I have so many really good close friends and close relationships with people that it's like I don't feel like I'm really missing a whole lot by not having those, like someone with me all the time or whatever. I'm not even really sure what that would look like. I'm not even sure what it would mean to say by not having a relationship, because it's like, well, I have all these relationships all over the place, kind of thing. And so we want to help people to see what they have instead of focusing on what they don't have. So we can do that. Then we got Jupiter. We talked about the sense of justice is how he protects us. And justice is kind of interesting. It's very theoretical. I used to read a lot about like for example, Jupiter would rule over something like human rights, for example. And human rights are interesting. I love human rights. I think humans have rights. But then all of a sudden, what's happening now is we have like, oh, well, those specific humans have rights, and now those specific humans have rights. And so we've broken up humans into all these different categories, and we've given them all kinds of different rights. And it's like, well, we're all different humans then. We're not the same. We don't have the same rights. What happened to human rights? Well, the problem with that is like, usually when there's a problem in human rights, it's because, well, I have my rights and you have your rights, and actually I'm right and you're right, and now our rights are clashing. And so it becomes very difficult. That's why we need a judge. We need like the wise elders to sit and sort of hear the whole case. And human rights isn't so much sometimes about being right or wrong. It's maybe who is a little bit more right, or a little bit who has a stronger case in a sense. Because like I say, again, it's often two people are right and those rights are clashing. Well, it's like, well, I'm a free person and you're a free person, and occasionally my freedom to express myself is going to step on your toes. right? When I crank my music up at 1 in the morning, for example, and I'm going to say, oh, I have a right. And you're going to say, well, I'm trying to sleep and I also have a right. And and so we'll have a dispute. We've kind of settled a lot of these disputes already, sort of thing. And we've just said, okay, after 10 o'clock, keep the noise down. You have a right to your noise until 10. I have a right to my sleep at that time. So this kind of thing. Jupiter persuades through that sort of sense of faith and goodwill. And that's how he convinces you that he's a good person, or you should do this, or you should do that. I talked about the universal love. Jupiter's very, very charitable. He'll give whatever he has, sort of thing. And Jupiter's got some fat on the system. It's like people sort of give to the gurus or the churches. And well, before I guess it would be before the French Revolution, really, or even before that, before World War One, because Bismarck really made a lot of those changes in Europe anyway. But so we go back in time, you give that money to the church, and the church turns around and does social services with that money. They help others, and so you give your charity to the church, and the church supports everybody else. Now, the government has more and more taken over the duties of the church, and now we give to the church, and I think they mostly throw it down in the basement and keep it. So we get now like Jupiter and Venus. They're the two gurus. And so Jupiter is sort of decides a case, what is just. And Venus is like, well, what is fair? And there's I don't know how this saying goes. It's a what could you say? A liberal. They always talk about, what is it? Inclusivity. How does that work? Inclusivity, fairness, equity, or something like this. And actually what that is.
Equity, inclusion thing? Diversity, equity, inclusion? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, diversity, inclusion, and
equity of some, I don't know.
And so what they've done there, and kind of like they're all three very nice sounding words, and nobody can possibly argue against any of it. But what they've done is they've mixed Jupiter and Venus energies. And so in practice, it's kind of not working very much, because you want to be inclusive and fair. And it's sort of like, kind of in order to do both those things, you have to sort of break one of them. You can't be both just and fair, in a sense. Like justice means, well, justice kind of means like you have to punish the evildoer. You get justice. You have to make sure the person does their tapas from a yogic perspective. And that's how we bring justice into our own lives by doing our tapas, by doing our spiritual. We pay the price, in a sense. And so we level it that way, in a sense. But fairness is more, it's balance. It's like being fair would be like, well, I punish two people the exact same for the same crime. But it's like, well, if a poor person steals a loaf of bread and a rich person steals a loaf of bread, justice would probably punish the rich person more. Because, like, well, you could have bought the loaf of bread. You're not a starving person. You're just an asshole who just stole bread. And so in a way, justice would, justice is not fair all the time. But it looks to balance the scale, you could say, at the same time. And so Venus is looking for fairness and balance. Venus is a little bit like the moon. In order to persuade, Venus isn't going to go out and try to convince you, but Venus is going to make herself look really pretty to draw you in, like a flower, for example. And that's also a defense mechanism. People generally don't want to hurt or dirty or harm beautiful things. And so women do that. They make themselves really beautiful sort of in order to protect themselves. We do that with our homes as well. We like paint the house and we keep the yard looking nice and we make our fence good and everything looks nice and it looks beautiful. And it's like people will give it more respect. And that actually works really, really well. In a sense, Jupiter is a little bit the same way. He's very open, but he protects himself through his own wisdom and his own opulence in a way. It's like the church, some of these really old churches that I'm seeing around Latin America here they're there because they're still so opulent and people don't want to tear these things down. Right? They want to kind of protect it and keep it fixed up and keep that church there. If it was some ugly broken house, right, you just tear it down, forget about it, start new. Andrian, yeah.
Yeah, it just made me think because you're in Puebla, that pyramid. I don't know if it's the one, but I forget the name. But there's a church built on top of a mountain, and there's a pyramid hidden. And I feel like that's very much like Jupiter, that pyramid, because no matter how the colonizers try to hide it, it's still like there's a pyramid inside a pyramid underneath a mountain, and they try to put the church on it. But it's like the biggest pyramid, and it's still there, you know? I feel like it's very Jupiterian. Like you can't get it out. It's under the...
you can't. And what they did is they built a pyramid, and then they built a pyramid on top of that, and a pyramid on top of that, and on top of that. So they kept building these pyramids, and they say it's the biggest one in the world. And then the Spanish came, and they tried to destroy it. And then they kind of realized like this is just way too big. And so then they buried it with dirt to try to hide it. And then they built their church on top. And then 3 times they put a big cross up. And 3 times that cross got struck by lightning and destroyed.
It's crazy. It's a beautiful story. It's really... And after that, they decided, I think like they got scared, and then they decided to honor the pyramid people. Like the Spaniards were like, they get nervous because of the power of it all, you know? And then they were like, okay, well, I guess we're gonna put like a sculpture, or I don't know what they did, but yeah, they decided to start honoring more.
It's La Virgen de los Remedios, the Virgin of the Remedies. And the Spanish conquistadors, actually, a lot of them followed this virgin goddess. And she's basically the goddess who gives the power to do faith healing. It's a mystery school in the Catholic Church, but it basically gives that power of faith healing. And so, yeah, and then that's why you get the snake symbol, and you get the devis, you get the goddesses, the tantric, basically a tantric church, a tantric temple. They call it I just did all this research in the last few days. They call it the Marian. What is it? The Marian. Oh, I forgot my words. Forgot my new church words. But anyways, it's basically the Marian tradition of mystery schools in the Catholic Church. It's fascinating. A big part of the reason I'm doing my Jupiter represents pilgrimage type stuff as well. And so a big part of the reason I'm sort of traveling, well, Latin America and America, and I want to go to Europe next year, is to sort of connect to the Christian traditions. And I kind of had a sense here, and like the Franciscans are a little bit more mystic, for example, and some of the churches in Europe that hold the Black Madonnas are kind of like Kali temples in a sense. This is the first time I came to the Virgin de los Remedios. There's many churches all over Spain, and again, the Spanish conquistadors were kind of bringing this goddess around, and so in a sense, well, I almost felt I was at that church. I spent all day there the other day, and I really felt like this is the whole reason I came to Latin America this year, was to meet this goddess, to meet with this energy. And so I'll really be watching for her temples now as I travel. So I kind of met my Christian god, my Christian goddess. So it was a big day for me. I really got and even all this ghost talk on the other side of things, I've had these like just these massive sort of expansions of my own consciousness in the last few days. It's been very, very beautiful. Little trip through
It's the
Mexico.
name of the.
Go ahead.
It's La Virgen de los Remedios.
So,
The remedy, the Virgin. What is it?
Virgin of
Virgen de los
the
Remedios.
yeah, Virgin of the Remedies.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and like I said, she's got churches kind of all over Spain and the Spanish world that was conquered by the Spanish. Venus, possessive love. Now, this is the funny thing. You've got all these sort of new age people are sort of saying like, oh, well, I want to be in love, but I don't want any of this possessive love. And it's like, well, if you don't want the possessive love, then really you kind of don't want a one-to-one loving relationship, because that often does become possessive. That's what Venus is. I own you. But, well, Venus is possessions generally in our life. Like, what do you own? Those are all your Venus things. But I'm sure I've said this in other classes, whatever you think you own actually owns you. And so that's like relationships as well. You see someone and they're like, you see they're quite unbalanced relationships sometimes, and they think, oh, like, I own this person, she's mine. But it's like, well, if she leaves you, it's going to destroy you. So who owns who? Sort of thing. And you can go into that in a lot of different perspectives. But Venus is that more possessive love that we have. And Venus, in a way, is the way that love possesses us as well. Right? We go a little bit crazy when there's love around. You know, they did science. Oh, science is great, man. So they did these tests on men, and just kind of your average garden variety man, you could say, and they brought a whole bunch of them in, and then they'd bring these like supermodel women in front of them, really sweet, incredibly beautiful women. And they were measuring the brains of the men at these times, and men really do go stupid around beautiful women. We really do. We lose brain cells in those cases because that Venus possesses us. And this is why you go back in classics and they're like, women, man, you gotta like just like be careful around men. And you gotta almost sort of like, I guess the classics would say, like, keep yourself covered and kind of stay home, and you're making men crazy. And modern women are saying, well, that's their own fault. Right? If men are going stupid and crazy, that's their fault. They should learn to control themselves. But on the other hand, it's like, this is part of that energy. Like, a beautiful woman just makes a man crazy. That's part of that energy. And so we don't really teach women that they have a responsibility in that. Go ahead, Andrea.
I don't feel like it makes men crazy. I think men are already crazy, and it just maybe bring them back down to earth, and they're not ready for that.
Yeah, but you're a
I
beautiful
don't know.
woman. You're a beautiful woman, and so every man you see has gone crazy. I see
But
them. I meet the men when they're not around you, and they're actually pretty cool. But if you take 5 men and you put 2 beautiful women in the middle of that, you've got a zoo, basically, right? It's complete madhouse. And so that's woman's perspective of man, especially a beautiful woman's perspective of man, is men are crazy. And the men, we blame it on the women. We go, oh, no, the women are crazy. But it's just, that's the energy of Venus. That's the energy of a beautiful woman. It possesses people. And so,
everybody's crazy, I guess.
yeah, well, we all have that. We all have that potential, right? We all have it inside of us somehow. And so, like, what I say about the Venus is beautiful woman has some responsibility. She has to be aware that that is the effect she's going to have on men. In a sense, they're going to go a little bit dumb. They're just not going to think as clearly as they normally would. And in a way, this is kind of why we go and look at beautiful art of the masters, for example, because we look at that and we kind of like, for a moment, we don't know what to think. We go a little bit dumb. We can only feel what that painting what that art is trying to express. But we can't find the words because we're dumb. We go stupid. We can't think anymore. Our brain stops working. And so, yeah, any beautiful woman is going to go, men are just, they're so stupid and silly, right? That's kind of what they say. And it's like, well, that's because they're around you. Right? So I see it, anyways. I'm not a beautiful woman, so I see both sides of men. And I think, Emmett, would you agree that this is a thing?
I think it happens on both sides and in different circumstances and in different ways. So I think it's definitely that just the same on each side. It just depends on the two individuals.
Yeah, well, it's that beauty factor. I think women as well, when they get around like an Adonis of a man, they also go stupid. And so it's that beauty that kind of possesses us. It takes over our brain. And it's that desire as well, it's and that's really what we're doing in yoga, is trying to control that desire. It's like I mentioned Mars. Who else did I mention? Anyways, I mentioned these different ways that someone else can kind of own you, right? That Mars, if someone can make you angry, they can own you. If whatever it might be. And so Venus is that kind of, it kind of takes command of you, your desires.
And I think I've got a good example maybe.
Okay.
Like in my case, I can only speak for that. My Venus would be in Aquarius in Western, or Capricorn in Vedic. But before, I would be more definitely in my Venus in Aquarius kind of like modality or mentality.
Yeah.
So back then, I would kind of use like my words and like humanitarian kind of perspectives to kind of woo women in a way. Like, it's not trying to seduce them that way, but that's the appeal that I would give off basically. And that when I would speak like that or act in these ways, then I could kind of see the effect that like, oh yeah, like that would get them to kind of lower their guard a little bit, which I think is the point of Venus, right? Is to get you to like a bit of that sweetness so you indulge just a little bit.
Yeah. And
So I think that's the way to see it.
using that sugar to persuade, in a sense, that sweetness. And Venus is, like, we could also say, like, Venus probably the most diplomatic of the planets, right? Because in diplomacy, you need a little bit of that flexibility. And you can use some sweetness to persuade people. You want to give them something. I give you that and you give me what I want, sort of thing. And so that's kind of how the Venus is working. Now, you mentioned your Venus being in Capricorn or Aquarius. Now, this effect you can see pretty clear in astrology. People that have, say, Mars affecting their Venus, these people are mostly controlled by their desires. They kind of run around chasing after the desires everywhere. A lot of passion, love and passion, and all that sort of goes together. People with Venus and Saturn, these are the yogis who sort of have some control over their desires. That Saturn influence is able to kind of control the Venus, the desires. And so it's like a beautiful woman goes by and they don't even look, for example, because their desires, they're what they want, that sugar doesn't affect them. They're able to kind of control themselves beyond it. And so that's what we're trying to do with yoga and a lot of our meditation practices. I tell a lot of young guys that I sort of counsel, I say, when a beautiful woman walks by, just try this practice of just like, don't look at her at all. Don't give her any of your attention at all. And just let that go by. Let that energy pass. Keep control of all your senses. Don't ogling like this. We're in the West, we don't see much of that ogling, but if you go to India, especially some small village, and walk through with a little blonde girl, you see all these completely dumb Indian boys, just they can't take her eyes off of them, sort of thing. I get a bit of that even, right? I'm like not a blonde girl, but I'm this blonde boy, and their senses, it catches the senses of people in these places where I'm not really supposed to be, and they can't take their eyes off me. They're just like, wow. And that's sort of like they're being controlled by their senses, basically. And so we want to find little practices we can do that we're not being controlled by that. We might, like, for diets and stuff like this, right? People that love cheesecake. And it's like, just practice not looking at the cheesecake, right? Just practice keeping your awareness on something else. And that kind of thing. And it really helps us to kind of hold, because what happens actually, I'll use the beautiful woman that walked by. So the beautiful woman walks by and we look at her and we kind of stare at her as she goes by. What we're doing is we're giving her our energy. That person, we're just giving our energy away for free, in a sense. And so we're losing energy for getting nothing at all back for it. You can see the cheesecake is the same or whatever it is. And so we want our energy exchanges with people to be more or less equal. They give a little, and we take a little, and give a little, and take a little, and there's this balance. And so the people that are going to give us something back for the energy that we give, those are the ones we want to put our attention and our awareness to, because we'll get the energy will cycle between us. It's not just this direct, the energy is going out and it's lost. And really, that's what's going on with our senses in those cases. As we're, again, especially for young men, staring at the beautiful woman, or going through the websites and checking out all the women on the websites, or these different sorts of things, is they're just kind of wasting their energy and getting nothing in return. And Venus kind of wants to do that in a way. It wants to just sort of take your energy. Venus will be fair. Venus is, again, diplomatic. And so you want to kind of keep that energy cycling. So, well, Saturn is the one, he kind of protects us with fear. And, well, that is a good defense mechanism in a sense. Sometimes you might say the Saturn-Venus person, they might have control over the senses, but on the other hand, maybe they're just afraid to look at that beautiful girl, afraid of the consequences of what might happen. And of course, they have laws in India. Oh, I think, say in the metro in Delhi, I think you can only look at a girl for about 5 seconds. They have it in law, actually. I don't know exactly how many seconds it is, but you can only like look at a girl for 5 seconds or something, and then after that, you've broken the law. You're ogling her now. And so when they say this kind of now too, that all the Me Too movement and blah, 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 that men are kind of, we're afraid to look at women. We're afraid to, and so that's actually kind of Saturn is trying to protect us with our fear. But again, too much fear is a problem. We need to have a certain healthy amount of fear to stay alive in life. Like, nobody likes Saturn because he's fear, and we're like, oh, you got to overcome all your fears. Well, overcome the ones that are sensible to overcome, and keep the fears that are quite sensible. And so there's some discrimination we have to use with that Saturn. Uses fear to protect, fear to persuade, or there's an army general in America, he used attrition to win the war. So he just cut off all the water and food to his enemy, and he won the war that way. And it's very brutal, but that's kind of Saturn will restrict things for you in order to protect you. It's like, mother, you can't go there, you can't go there, you can't go there. And just trying to protect, in a sense. And then the love of Saturn, it was interesting because when you think of the 7th house in astrology chart partnerships, they generally say Saturn is the only good planet to have in your 7th house. Any other planet is going to cause a whole bunch of trouble. But the problem is, nobody wants a Saturn relationship. They're like, what, it's just duty and commitment? What about love, man? Well, your love's going to burn out after 5 years. Your duty and commitment is going to be there after 60 years. So it's kind of like, well, what do you want out of life? that sort of thing. And so we don't like that duty and commitment, but it's very, it's a very important kind of love, to be committed to do the duties, do what you said you kind of do for someone, fulfill your duties. My Mexican friend now, he's taking care of his mother, who's, I think she's 86 years old now. So he's taking care of his mother, and he's got his wife in the home, and he's got, I think, 3 children, 2 boys and a little girl. And he's kind of doing all the work to take care of them. And he's feeling a little bit overwhelmed by this at the moment, like just work and nothing, right? He's arguing with the oldest boy, and right, and fighting there, and nobody seems to appreciate anything he's doing, and he's just working and giving, just doing his duty, right? Showing his commitment to the family and not feeling like he's getting anything back. And I said, well, actually, what you're doing now is very, very important. Like, you're taking care of your mother. And I said, you better take really good care of your mother, because all your children are watching that. And so then when you get old, your children are going to take care of you pretty much the same way that you took care of your mother. And so you better take very good care. And so that's kind of Saturn. You do this sort of thankless work, where it feels very thankless in the short term, but Saturn has some sort of a long-term plan for you. And so you got to look at the future with Saturn and sort of say, like, what's going to be where is this going to go? Or what is the possibility of that? So that duty and commitment is a wonderful, wonderful way of love. It's a little bit dry, it's boring, but like, man, it's if you got some Saturn love in your life, you're a very, very lucky person. I find clients hate it when I say, you know, they're in their early 30s, and I'm looking at their astrology chart, and they've never had a good relationship in their life. And I say, oh, well, you've got the Saturn period coming. And I get one client, she just met someone actually a little while ago, and I said, yeah, I think this is going to turn into a relationship, but it's going to be a lot of distance between you. Maybe even a little bit of an open relationship with the two of them. I said, but with your Saturn, I think that relationship it'll be durable, but you'll have some house together, or you'll have some commitments together that are keeping you together. But otherwise, you're both going to have a lot of freedom. I said the relationship itself is going to be very dry, very boring. And she didn't like that. She wants love. But it's like, well, you've had 36 years of experience with romantic love. And how's that going for you? And so maybe when you make a stronger commitment with Saturn, things will go better. And I think they will go good for her, but they don't like hearing that sort of truth. Rahu and Ketu, I wasn't sure how they defend themselves, but I think really this sort of sense of like, you can't handle the truth. And so Rahu and Ketu are these shadowy figures. So it's almost the more truth that you can handle, the more that you can sort of accept the miracles of this world, the more you're going to see and experience them, sort of thing. And so that's how Saturn or Rahu and Ketu, they protect you by confusing you, by sort of not allowing you to see the truth until you're fully ready, in a sense. Otherwise, you don't understand. Like, someone talks about ghosts and oh, they're crazy people, go away from me, or whatever. So that truth that you can handle of the universe is the amount of truth that you will get, in a sense. And otherwise, their love and persuasion is very, very sort of unconventional. Ketu, for example, is complete non-attachment. And of course, this is a big ideal. To talk about attachment for a second, because Jupiter is probably one of the most attachment-orientated planets. Like, he makes things stick together. He's that glue. When we think of Kaf, we think of the fat, but you can think of that kind of glue that kind of holds things together. And so that's the attachment of Jupiter. And so Jupiter really does make us attached to things. Ketu is the exact opposite, the unattachment. And that's sort of the ideal with a lot of modern relationships. It's like we want the relationship without the attachments. Now, that's a very, very difficult thing, because if you have no attachments, you're just coming and going, and there's nothing to actually keep you in that person's life. And a friend of mine is just getting a divorce, about 2 years married. And he said, "Did you see that in my astrology chart?" And I said, "Well, I don't remember seeing it in your astrology chart, but I remember when you were telling me how open your relationship was, I was pretty sure the divorce was going to be around the corner." Because you need some attachment in relationships. You need, and we like having attachment, actually. It's like your attachment to a place or to a home is what helps you to feel comfortable there. It's what keeps you there. It makes you feel like you belong, those attachments. And so attachments are quite nice. Rahu, well, Rahu and Ketu, neither of them are very good for relationships. Neither of them are good for material life at all. And basically, relationships, I think that's where a lot of people get confused with relationships. They start to attach the spiritual ideals to the relationship of like non-attachment, non-commitment, all that sense of freedom. They want to sort of attach to relationships. But relationships are like, you've got to have someone you can have faith in, someone you can make an agreement with, someone, like the important things are relationships are sort of like someone who's going to do what they say they do. And so these sort of, a lot of these spiritual ideals, relationships are matter. That's material in our life, that other person. And so we kind of have to, it sounds bad to say we have to treat them like matter. We have to treat them like an object, but we have to treat them like an object we respect. And so we have to give them what they want and what they like to kind of keep them around, right? Like we have to be nice to them or they're going to go. That's a material object. If I'm not good to this coffee cup, I'm going to break it and it's just not going to be there tomorrow. And so if I give the coffee cup what it likes and clean it and whatever it is, then it'll be there for a whole lifetime. And so, again, it's that sense of tantra being teaching us how to use things. But in order to use things, we get to know them very deeply. We get to know what they like and what they feel and all of that stuff. And we kind of see them as a subject, but use them as an object in a sense. And we want to use them. Again, it's kind of the language almost doesn't work because it's like you're using someone, but you're using them like in a respectful way, right? Use the way you use someone that you love, right? You show them love, you give them love, and they return it. So that kind of thing. So I've got some notes here. I did some notes from stanzas on vibration. And I think I've mentioned this is kind of my main scripture that I follow and read. And so meditation consists of the conscious experience of movement, right? These cycles of consciousness that are going through the body and pouring out through the senses, through the complex unity of the senses, their objects, and the vital breath. The vital breath is like, we think of prana just in our breathing, but this vital breath is our whole psychophysical complex. It's the energy that pours out from us. It's the energy that's kind of rides our senses out in the world and finds the objects it likes, for example. It knows and it likes, right? Our ears reach out, and it's that pranic, that vital force that's reaching out from the body to kind of connect to the objects that are within it, that are kind of activated at the moment. And so it talks about this, like attending to the movement alone or using the body. Kind of go through here. So yeah, we get the fire of the mighty Bhairava that burns in the great fire pit of the heart, aroused by the fire sticks of meditation, waxes great. The yogi should then meditate on the abodes of the three abodes of subject, object, and means of knowledge as one within himself, the possessor of power, that's you, and the means of knowledge as one with them, or sorry, and the radiance, the teja, that sun power of Bhairava, was power fully manifest. There's that power of the fire, the sun, and the moon, kind of bringing it all together. And Kashmiri Shaivism, they have the trident, and every one has a goddess sitting above her. And so that's the fire of the sun and the moon, but they also talk about her as Para, Para, and Para, like this. And so that's that corresponding to respectively to the three Para energy. Para is the one that generates a sense of oneness. Para, I gotta put, yeah, I'm missing some accents. Anyways, the energy of unity and difference, and the lower Para energy of diversity. And so, of course, we're always trying to connect to that energy of the highest one, the highest abode of Shiva. I got typos in here. What a disaster. Anyway, so moreover, they possess that fourth form that's unlimited. And so that's the three powers coming together. But then they talk about these goddesses are 12 actually in their aspect, like the solar disk, because there's those four energies that express themselves three different ways. It's an area I still need to do more research on, but it really sort of starts to connect this Shivism, you could say, with the Vedic astrology. The wheel of the absolute Anuttara chakra flowing out of the heart through the void of the eyes and the senses. Like in a way, it's like our senses, when our senses are moving from one object to another, if I look at one object and that fills this, kind of fills the void, that object fills the void of my senses. But then I turn and it's like there's this emptiness in front of me. And the senses pour out until they find an object. But what we're kind of trying to do with meditation is make it so that when we take our awareness off one sense object, we don't automatically put it to another one. We just focus on the void. Now, I think I included in here another line about meditation as the yogi who can sit with his eyes wide open and see nothing. And so that's almost this like nirman kind of energy, this ambivalence sort of thing. You're looking out in the world, but your senses aren't attaching to anything. It's just a sort of emptiness in front of you, kind of a meditative state. So the wheel of the absolute Anuttara chakra flows out from the heart through the void of the eyes and the other senses onto the sense objects. The rays of the wheel progressively engender the fire of the subject, the moon of the object, the sun and Zameen of the object, each phase of destruction, creation, persistence. And so that's these kind of constant wheels, these objects. So when I take my eyes off of one sense object, it disappears, it's destroyed, right? And there's this point of void, and then the eyes reach out again and they find some object to create. So they reach out to something, they make a whole story about it, basically in the mind. It sustains that sensual image somehow, either in the mind or directly with the senses through focus. And then again, we turn and that whole thing is destroyed. These cycles are just going and going. So in this way, the yogi should contemplate how everything in the field of sound, etc., that should be becomes one with the wheel and falls upon it along the path of the voidness of the sense of hearing and etc. This wheel, which is all things like the universal monarch, is flowing by is followed by vassals, which are the senses, wherever it falls. So in a way, they're saying the monarch is like, well, it's the sun. And so it's being followed by the moon and the five senses in a way. So wherever it falls in the all-embracing process. In this way, the cosmic path of emanation spontaneously emerges from the great wheel of Bhairava and its surrounding goddesses of consciousness. And so that's that. In a sense, that's a kind of unbiased kind of way of looking as well at the world, which is also a kind of one of Jupiter's higher aspects. Right? We want the judge to be unbiased. Right? That's a good judge, basically. And so in a way, we also want our senses to be unbiased as they're going out, not attaching more to one object than the other. It's like, if I'm sitting out on the street, sort of staring at the curb, looking at nothing in a way, well, what's the difference between me looking at that curb and looking up at, say, again, what I tell my students, looking up the beautiful woman who's walking by, right? Because she's kind of also treats me, gives me about as much energy as the curb is giving me. And so you want to keep that sort of unbiased control of your senses, I guess you could say. And that will allow, like they talk about the spontaneity of the emanation. In this way, the cosmic path of emanation spontaneously merges with the great wheel. And that was what I talked in a few classes about a little bit. I was talking about the difference between Kriya and Karma, where Kriya being this sort of spontaneous action, quite connected actually to the Bhagavad Gita rules of not seeking the results or the fruits of your action. So it's just a spontaneous action that just arises for the sake of itself. And so we get that kind of thing. Then, even though the universe is merged into it, leaving behind nothing but its faint, latent traces, contemplate this great whirling wheel as an outpouring of one's own nature. And so that's in a way what we could say the world around us is an outpouring of your own nature. When all the fuel of objectivity is consumed in the fire of the wheel and its latent traces are destroyed, contemplate the wheel on the verge of extinction and in the process of extinction and finally as totally extinct. And so it's like you're bringing in that fuel of objectivity. So the objects, the sense objects, you kind of bring them all inside of yourself, burn them in that fire of your own nature, realizing that's kind of, they're not different from you, essentially. And in a way, it's like this wheel of the chakra. You're in the middle of the chakra, and your Shaktis is this whole nature around you. And so you have better knowledge or your better ability to work with nature, the more your power. In this way, by this meditation, the universe devolves into the wheel and thus into consciousness, which finally shines forth void of all objects. So there's our kind of our purpose of all this, void of all objective sense. And so it's just the subject. And so it's the eternal subject. The nature of consciousness is such, however, that there's again a new creation. And so we're always kind of like, the cycles aren't stopping. You never get fully out of the cycles. There's always that new creation. There's always that new sense object that wants to kind of control you, you could say. You gotta kind of be strong. There's always that impulse to see the world as separate from you, to see someone else as being different or separated from you, and well, what I do doesn't affect anyone and this kind of thing. But we have to really be aware that, it's almost that butterfly effect. Everything you do has an effect on the whole universe. Yeah, so we can make gain creation, for such as the activity of the great goddess of consciousness, who every instant dissolves the universe, thus into his own consciousness, then admits it as eternally identified with Bhairava. And so they say, like, first take repose in the emptiness of the heart of consciousness, then take rest in the outer reality of the rising, the ascending breath, the prana, then do the filling of the moon, of the descending breath. And so they're talking breaths, but this is kind of the senses, it's the vital force going out. So breath is kind of the arising of that ascending breath. The prana is the emitting of energy out into the world. And then so we emit that energy out and we look around and how much we understand things or how much feedback the world then gives us from that comes back to us. And that's sort of the filling of the moon, the descending breath, yapana. And the point of that is, well, we can see our own nature by the nature that's around us. And so that prana, apana becomes quite important that way. So we perceive our own nature in all things in the external world. And so we're free from our desires of them. There's a beautiful shloka in the Bhairava Tantras. It's like, how can my devotees ever possibly feel any fear in this world? Because you can only be afraid of something else. And if there is no other thing separate from you in this world, fear is impossible. So, oh, it's such a beautiful shloka. Let's just hear the Bhairava shloka. O possessor of everything, through your devotees bound by, though your devotees bound by karma and conditioning of mind are caught in the net of destiny that arouses troubles and bondage, still they are not afraid of the fret and fervor of this world. Having realized the universe is your own existence, they are not afraid of worldly difficulties, because fear exists only when there is someone else to inflict it. But when there is none other than you, how can fear possibly arise? Beautiful Bhairava Slota by Abhinavagota. And so it's like, well, the devotees, we're bound by karma. We're bound by our conditioning of minds. Like, I'm not separate from that. I am also. We're caught in this net of destiny that seems to just bring trouble to our lives. There's so much. We do fret and we worry and we're concerned. We have families, we have friends, we kind of fret and worry, but at the end of the day, it's like, still we're not afraid to go forward because we realize that all of that world is just being emanated from ourselves. It's only me. And so how can there, like he says, how can there be fear if there's none other than you to inflict it? And so very beautiful shlokas. Now let's just read a bit more of this because it's so lovely. Oh, angel of death, don't look towards me with wrathful and frightening eyes, as I'm always absorbed in the worship of Lord Shiva. Through constant devotion, meditation, and reflection, I become steadfast and courageous, one with the energy of the terrifying Bhairava. Thus, dreadful looks from death can do me no harm. O Bhairava, I offer you salutations, who has awakened me to the realization that everything in existence is you alone. As a result of this awakening, the darkness of my mind has been destroyed. I'm neither frightened of the evil family of demons, nor am I afraid of Yama, the fearful lord of death. And so that's kind of what we're trying to go through all these practices. My friend here was asking me, he's like, aren't you afraid of death? And it's like, well, I have some fear of death, but it's at the same time, I also have this understanding that, well, this life, this body, this current body is such a tiny part of who I am. Like, even as an individual, I'm this, like, well, from the beginning of time till the end of time is who I am, is who you are, it's who we are. And so little things like death or these little troubles that we have that, oh my God, I'm going to suffer for a week, or, oh, that's going to hurt for a month, or, oh my God, 10 years, I have to work too hard. These are such small, tiny little things when you realize that well, you're this infinite being, this Bhairava, is the truth of who we are. Yeah, oh Lord Shiva, it's through your existence revealed to me by real knowledge that I realize all my attachments and all the existence of this universe is activated by you. It's by this awakening in my mind that becomes saturated with immortal devotion. I experience supreme bliss. Sometimes I feel misery, which arouses torment in my mind. But at that same moment, blessed by the shower of your grace, a clean and clear vision of my oneness with you arises, the impact of which my mind feels appeased. And so that's also kind of it. It's like when you fill yourself with goodness and you run into troubles in life, and well, we're human, so we're gonna worry. There's gonna be some thing, a little whatever it is. But we can take that very next moment. We can realize that sort of oneness we have with Shiva, that largeness that is our greater truth, and we can it's such a healing balm. Like it's like I always say, like purpose and meaning, you can overcome any suffering. And so if your pursuing meaning is connected with universal purpose and meaning, well, go for it, man. Do anything. That fear just won't be there. Yeah, so there's this kind of thing. Now I'll just finish going through this because this is the 5 pranas in this shloka, and it really sort of explains them quite nicely. So then, due to the filling of the moon of the descending breath, he perceives his own nature as all things in the external world, and so is free from all desires. Then, by the rising of the breath of equality, samana, he experiences the repose that comes from the dynamic union of all things. That's a lot of that dynamic union of Shiva and Shakti that we talk about coming together of consciousness happens with the samana breath. So it's like you senses go out, they attach to some objects, they take all those sense impressions back to you, realizing that we're one with that external world. We get a little bit of peace. We get that peace, and what's happening is it's that matching, that equality breath is that pairing of the externally and the internal sides of our world kind of coming together. Then when the fire of the upward moving breath, udhana, arises, he devours the differentiation of subject from object. When this devouring fire is quelled and the pervasive breath, Vyana, arises, he shines free of all limitations. We sometimes compare like the Ida Pingala and the Shishumna to the Prana, Apana, and Udana. The older texts, it's kind of the same thing when we look at the older Pranas. So the Udana is like the upward and downward breath. They kind of come together, they mix in samana, and it brings that upward sort of moving force of, that would be like the actual fate or the actual sort of outcome or the fruit of the combination of your internal and external world. And so we kind of burn all that up, and then so the devouring fire is quelled, and the pervasive breath, the Vyana, arises and he shines free of. The pervasive breath is that sort of realization of the subtlest energy. So the same section of Spandakaraka, we go into some other practices. And I think I mentioned this, especially the practice of K without an A, but I'm sure. I'm just getting a bunch of messages now. Dana mentioned a Stendhal effect. Yeah, okay. So we get this sort of practices, and this is a very common practice in Kashmiri Shaivism. I think it's probably, I'll learn how to use a computer someday. So I think it's probably one of the main practices is this idea of reciting the Sanskrit. Not so many typos. reciting the Sanskrit alphabet. So they talk about reciting from M to K, and they say you can do that with or without the vowels. I really like the vowel-less version of that. Like M, you can actually get a bit of pronunciation out without a vowel, but K, there's no hope. Rarely like that. So K is quite difficult. So I like doing it. And so I put the list of them here. Kind of thing. And so you go through that, but then what they do in Kashmiri Shaivism, probably find this online somewhere. I was looking, I've got Mark sent me a version of this somewhere. I was looking for it, I didn't find it yet. But you put all these syllables into the body, basically. And there they do attach it to a vowel. And I think even in this shlok, anyways, in this shloka, they were talking about the consonants being the goddesses, which would make the vowels the Shivas, you could say, in a sense. I've often understood it the other way, is because the vowel is the empowerment, the part that empowers the consonant. Like you don't have anything without a vowel, sort of thing. And so we get this sort of thing. A lot of visualization techniques in Kashmiri Shaivism and a lot of shamanic practices, but transforming just visualizations as a transformation of energy. Sometimes it's just the visualization, the movement of energy as you're breathing, or you might attach light to that. We get a lot of shamanic practices sort of take you down this shamanic visualization, like you'll stop and you'll maybe start, so picture yourself walking down a path, and then you come to a door, and then you open the door. What's behind the door? You don't have to tell me, just kind of visualize that. And you go through that door and you meet someone. And who do you meet? And then you come to a box and you open that box, and what's in the box? So you get this, a lot of shamanic practices take you on this kind of journey of consciousness. But what you're doing is you're opening up different parts of the mind. It's like you open the door. What do you see? You come to a tree and there's a door in the tree. You open that. What is behind that? And so these sort of things are kind of taking you through your mind. Oh, it's almost 11 already. So there's those sorts of visualizations. Then the Spandakaraka also talks about these other practices, points of different concentration in the body. They talk the vital breath of the 5 points of concentration. You could say that generally might be the chakras. The two main points in the body we concentrate on, though, when we're doing meditation is usually the heart or the third eye, are really the two main points in the body for concentration. But then they've got these kind of visual techniques outside, like the mandala or the yantras, these sort of sacred circles, the sacrificial area, the chalice, the rosary, the book, the shivalinga, the skull. And a lot of these are sort of, the paper mache figure is like, in India for a lot of festivals, they make these paper mache gods and then throw them in the river. The stone idols, the effigies. And so these are kind of things that we can use for our meditation practices, basically. Now, I wrote a little bit about initiation in this practice as well, because I think out of all the planetary energies, Jupiter is that energy of initiation. Also gets associated with mantra as well, Jupiter. Mantra and initiation are sometimes a little bit the same. A guru that gives you a mantra is often said to be that's an initiation. The Spandakaraka has this, oh wow, it's a very elaborate rite of initiation. They pull the string of the soul out of you and they hit you with a flower to put the soul back into you, all fresh and refreshed and clean. And there's some really elaborate initiation rites and techniques, and I've been offered quite a few initiations as well. I took someone when I was younger, different things, but now I kind of resistant to initiation, because to me initiation if I take initiation for that, then it's kind of like, oh, well, what about all this other stuff? And so I find even religion sometimes can be very, it's like you declare yourself a Hindu, for example, and it's like, well, now you've just declared war against all the Muslims. Right? You declare yourself a Christian. You just, well, almost everybody declares war against the Muslims when they declare a religion. And so declaring these kind of things, these are names. These are more associated with Mercury, you could say. And so they're going to really divide and separate. And so your beliefs and things like that, these are more, we have to keep our theories a little bit open, you could say. And so I kind of identify, maybe some people really push me, I'll say I'm a Shaivite. Generally, I like maybe a mystic sort of a person, which really leaves the door wide open to everyone. But my guru, and he got this from Lakshman Ju. So Mark has been very, very clear about initiation. He had so many people want him to initiate them. And he's very clear, and Lakshman Ju was also very clear that we don't need any kind of laboratory initiation. And Kashmiri Shiva is very clear on this. You don't need an initiation. Guys like Wallace, can't remember his first name, Harish Wallace. Anyways, he's a white guy with a PhD in Kashmiri Shaivism. I made a lot of these PhDs in Kashmiri Shaivism. They're very interesting kind of people compared to the Kashmiri Shaivites I meet who are just sort of living on the Ghats of Varanasi. Very, very different sort of schools of thought. But some people are selling initiation. That's essentially what something like Yoga Alliance is doing by selling teacher training certificates. It's like, here's, you got your certificate, now you're initiated into Yoga Alliance. My teachers have been very clear, none of this is necessary. Like, I never went through any kind of formal Shiva initiation, for example, but I've stayed at a gazillion ashrams. I've been on pilgrimages to Shiva places that are like, life has fully initiated me. I've never, well, maybe the only guru I've met who I think would have any, maybe, it almost doesn't even make sense, but who might have any sort of power to initiate me would be Mark. And he's like, well, you don't need initiation. So it's kind of like this. It's like, I know very few people that have had to kind of done the work or taken the path to kind of get to know Shiva the way I have. So it's kind of like, well, what are you going to do for me? What are you going to do that Shiva hasn't just naturally done for me? And so we go like that. Shadaran, Shadarat, Makam. Everything is the essence of everything else. And so this is the truth, then what the heck is anybody going to do initiating you? So I wrote a whole bunch about Tantra here. Different things, sexy Tantra, different kinds of Tantras. A little bit different. I think from the Western perspective, we'd kind of say there's three main kind of Tantras, which would be the sexy, the Tantra, which is Neo-Tantra, they call it online, I found out. And then there's Kashmiri Shaivism, which is quite wide and broad. And I think it's probably the most classical sort of original Hindu Tantra anyways. And then there's Sri Vidya, which is a sort of Tantra they're teaching in South India. And these are the Brahmins. So this is kind of an orthodox Tantra. So they basically hold on to all their orthodox philosophies, but then they bring in tantric practices and tantric devis. And so it's a little bit, from my perspective, it's a little bit corrupted. I tend to, I don't know why, I always ignore Vajrayana Tantra, which is the Buddhist Tantra. So I said three, and now there's four. So there's, and well, Tantra is always like that. It's like, here's four states of consciousness. Oh, but then there's beyond. So anyway, so there's always like that. And you could say that generally with Tantra. There's no end of the road in Tantra. There's no, oh, you're enlightened, oh, your journey's finished. Even at death, your journey is not finished. You're just change of state, changing of energy. And so it's always a changing of energy. There's always a beyond. There's always a more subtle energy we can try to connect with. There's always a deeper truth we can find. Don't stop, man. Just keep going. And so there's this kind of thing. I said many times, I think the best definition of Tantra is that Tantra is a series of textbooks. And that's probably the best. So I wrote a little bit about some of the different textbooks, some of the different schools of Tantra are also here. I don't know, I touch things on my screen and then I get all lost. So there we go. So I mentioned how some of these different textbooks work. And levels of dualism as well, sort of. Yeah, and so Kashmiri Shaivism, we think of things on the level of dualism or that purity to the non-dual sort of ideal, then really like something like the Agors. They are the most extreme non-dualists. The Agors are the ones who like live on cremation ground and they meditate on dead bodies and right, they eat shit and they don't see any difference between the pile of shit and the bouquet of flowers kind of thing. So these are the really, really extreme non-dualists. And then so you get a little bit, it softens from there, you could say. But then it's like, well, in an intellectual way, we sort of classify the tantras in these different ways. But then if you go to India and, well, in the West, you say tantra and everybody thinks sex. You go to India and you say tantra and everybody thinks black magic and sex. But then you've got all these sort of like, you've got the Natha cults. The Nathas are tantrics. And they belong with the Junakara. Where is it? Here. Anyway, somewhere in here I've got all this stuff. And so they belong with the Junakara. The Junakara is like it's like Yoga Alliance in a way. It's this large regulatory board that the different ashrams or the different sort of heterodox tantric sects, they belong to Junakara, and that allows them like access to the temples, and they get to belong to a brotherhood, like almost like a trade organization. And so then the Junakara kind of helps them out if they need it in different ways. And they can get access to different gurus and teachings and all sorts of different stuff. And in practice, a lot of these are like almost like blue collar Babajis. I'm still talking, but anyways, if you guys need to go, you can cut off. I was a little late starting. And so you get this kind of, so actually the textbooks they're following, well, some of them fall under Kashmiri Shaivist textbooks, but a lot of them are actually Vaishnava textbooks, but non-dual Vaishnava sort of stuff. I think that a lot of reason the Nathas sort of follow that Vaishnava non-dualism, just because there was the availability of non-dual textual support, you could say. Whereas the Kashmiri Shaivism, a lot of that was like really hidden and secret and kind of lost until really modern times. Even it's being translated in English, but it wasn't available in Sanskrit or in local languages either. It was just hiding, you could say. So that's coming up. You get guys like Sadhguru has a little bit of perspective on Tantra, talking about his technology. That sort of matches what I say about Tantra as being this, how you use things. And so if you really know how to use, say, energy, the energy of things, that's like, wow, that's almost like putting a new technology in your hand. Even if something was just like a mundane thing to you before, but when you understand the energy of it, it becomes a whole sort of thing. Other gurus associating with kind of kriya, that spontaneous activity. We talked about that. There's the three. Go ahead, Andrea.
I just have maybe it's a silly question, but is Tantra kind of like similar to alchemy in a way?
Yeah, well, they are quite when you go into sort of the classical tantras, that's where the black magic gets associated with it in India, because it was very alchemical. In a broader way, tantra kind of just means mysticism, just kind of means occultism. And so any of that, but it's an occult science. Like tantra is a spiritual science. And it's occult science. So yeah, it gets very strongly connected with things like alchemy. Very, very much so. There's the whole, well, a lot of the herbalism and stuff like that was from early sort of tantric sort of side of things. Really, what we call science today is it's alchemy. Really, it's just very, very advanced alchemy. And so all the scientists, well, darn rights, they're dealing with devil. They built a nuclear weapon, for crying out loud. Try and unleash that devil and see what happens. Right? And they're making like nuclear power plants. And so that's the devil contained. But we know at some day those nuclear power plants are going to break down and those devils are going to get released. And God, they're going to destroy. God, a horrible thing. So science is also kind of alchemy. It's dealing with the devil in a lot of ways. So what Jupiter side of that wants to teach us, it's like, it's okay, like do science, do this stuff, but use your discrimination. Try to use it in the right way. Don't use it in the wrong way. And so for that, we need to like listen to our teachers and talk to our elders and things like that. Big problem today, it's like the young people are sort of ruling the world. And young people, especially university students, right? They go out and they protest, rah, rah, rah. We want this. We want to change the world and we want to do good in the world. And to be honest, when I look back on my life, I was quite an activist when I was in college and stuff like that. Very, very active. Almost like a militant extremist, you could say. But very, very active. But I look back on that and I'm like, God, was I a stupid kid. Right? Like I would never fight for those things. Now I kind of see why it's like that or why it's not like that. And so age and experience. And so that's why we have to listen to our elders and these kind of thing and talk to them. And again, we have to use our own discrimination as well, but experience really says a lot. We see some of the names on Devanam, Charishanam, Guru Kachana, Sanibam, Buritam, Troksham, Ham, Nami, Brihaspati, Rim, Brihaspataye. And so that brings me to the end of it, and now's a good time, I guess, to call it a day. Do you have any questions or anything? Well, I am going to stop the recording. If anyone has any questions, I can go hang out until you all disappear from my screen. So, yeah, I have time. I'm in no rush today, so.